That's what it sounded like Saturday night outside the Israeli consulate in downtown Toronto. An estimated 250 people, mostly Jews, came out for what organizers billed as a vigil for democracy. The event was arranged by JSpaceCanada, with 6 more progressive groups joining in. At issue is their worry about what kind of country Israel may become under the new right-wing coalition government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Canadian rally was purposely timed to coincide with the huge protests held in Tel Aviv and other major centers in Israel on Saturday. Then, Israel's current ambassador to Canada, Ronen Hoffman, took to Twitter on Saturday night and announced that he was resigning because of the new Israeli government. And his tweets made a lot of ripples, even though Hoffman himself is not giving interviews. He wrote that, quote, his personal and professional integrity, unquote, don't allow him to continue to serve, and Israel should find someone else soon so he can go home by the summer, although he will still do his job, he says, with passion until then. Hoffman is the second Israeli ambassador to quit in a very public way. The ambassador to France gave her notice 3 weeks ago. Both she and Hoffman were political appointees from the Yesh Atid party, which is now Netanyahu's main opposition.
I do think that this is a clear message to Canadian Jewry that we have to speak out. That if someone who's serving the government of Israel in a high-level diplomatic post is saying, I can't do this because these proposed laws and the laws that have already passed are in violation of my personal ethics, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the position of staying silent anymore?
I'm Ellin Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, January the 23rd, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Ronen Hoffman was elected to Israel's Knesset for the new Yesh Atid party under leader Yair Lapid 10 years ago, and he served for 2 years with Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government of the day. But as we know about Israeli politics, coalitions break up, and the Yesh Atid party has changed sides, and the country's gone through 5 elections in recent years alone. Hoffman got the nod for Canada's ambassadorship in 2021 during the brief time when Yesh Atid was in power in a coalition agreement with Naftali Bennett's party. The Canadian Post usually goes to career diplomats from inside Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs who aren't tied to any party. But with Netanyahu making his comeback just a few weeks ago, observers say the new regime wants to put their own people in. So was Hoffman's announcement made to wound Netanyahu? Or maybe he did a Lisa LaFlamme and took control of the narrative before he got canned. And what does this all mean for Canada-Israel relations? Well, we'll hear from JSpaceCanada a little later in the show. But first, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by Vivian Bercovici. She's Canada's former ambassador to Israel, and she knows a thing or two about what Ronen Hoffman went through because she was appointed by Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2014, and then a year and a half later, after Justin Trudeau and the Liberals took over, she was fired. Now she's a columnist who also runs her own news platform, State of Tel Aviv, and she joins me now. When you saw this, how surprised were you? You wrote to me, wow.
Well, yeah, I had just woken up and I hadn't had coffee yet. But yeah, wow. I mean, look, when somebody in that sort of position resigns, it's always kind of sets you back on your heels a bit. Having said that, he's just getting ahead of the guillotine, so to speak. There is a lot of bloodletting going on at the moment with respect to political appointees within the public service and key institutions in Israel. The new government is coming down swiftly and hard and letting people go. Ronen Hoffman, I think, just got ahead of the curve, knew what was coming, and probably wanted to control his own exit.
Yet he came to this post full of priorities to link with the Indigenous community in Canada, to do much more joint research and development, to fight terrorism. He was very optimistic about coming here and doing good job here. And all of a sudden, even days after the New Year post that he made a video saying, I'm looking forward to being here for Israel's 75th anniversary. So how quickly does this decision come when just a few days after the Netanyahu government was sworn in, he was saying, I'm here for a long time?
I'm sure that everything he said, he meant. I wouldn't doubt his genuineness for a moment, in terms of his continued commitment to the job. But, I experienced this as well. When one is a political appointee and a new government comes in, one never really knows how the new government is going to behave.
But the timing was very interesting. Why do it on the same night? Why do it that way at all? Why tweet about it?
There's so much going on here that is so dramatic, that whatever, with all due respect to Ambassador Hoffman, whatever motivated him to or not, it's not making huge waves here. It just won't. Okay. We feel, people in Israel, that we are, in my view, we are at the most critical juncture of the nation's history, possibly even more important than the creation of the state in 48, because we have a seismic clash of culture. What's going on here is, if not just judicial reform or this or that, or Derry being a recidivist, criminal. That's Aryeh Deri, the Shas cabinet minister. This is about whether or not Israel continues as a liberal democratic state, and the value and priority to which Israelis attached to that. That's what's going on here. Or do we become more theocratic? Do we prioritize Jewish religious law, halacha? That's what's going on. Okay. And it's impossible to describe the anger, the fury, and this really pervasive sense of gloom and doom. And it's not hysterical. It's not dramatic. It's just, the future character, democratic character of the country is at stake, period. I'm not even getting into the economic issues and all that. So when you ask, why did he choose to do it last night? Again, I can only speculate. Is it dramatic? Of course it's dramatic. But he wanted to be dramatic, clearly. Who knows? Maybe he had been speaking to Lapid last night, and Lapid told him about the energy at the demonstrations. It was 120,000, by the way, not 100. In the pouring rain last weekend for the first one, when I went out, there were 100,000. And, Israelis, they're tough, but man, not during what they call winter. They melt. And it was pouring, and people brought out there were the elderly were out. It was all ages, young children. And again, last night, it was the same thing.
The cabinet was today. I guess you saw the news on Sunday. We're recording today, Sunday, but we'll be broadcasting Monday, that Aryeh Deri was booted from cabinet after the High Court said, hey, he can't be serving. He's got too many criminal records on his past, and he's not qualified.
Well, so first of all, I just want to clarify this point because it's important. Netanyahu's made a point of saying that he had asked Deri to leave cabinet with a heavy heart. Okay. And it's being discussed openly that both he and Deri and legal advisors are working to try to figure out how they can kind of deal with this. Had Netanyahu not asked Deri to leave or fired him, he was going to be in contempt of court. Okay. This ruling came down from the Supreme Court 3 days ago. He took his sweet time in dismissing Deri, given the severity of the situation. And the Supreme Court came to the conclusion that Deri was not suitable to serve as a cabinet minister, never mind with 2 huge portfolios, because, for 2 reasons. One is it was just patently unreasonable that a recidivist criminal who has been convicted of crimes,
breach of trust and financial crimes. We should just clarify, for our listeners. Yeah,
basically corruption-related, things. That it was just patently unreasonable that someone with this character should be serving in such high and trusted office. And keep in mind, on top of everything, he was going to be rotating into the Ministry of Finance. This is a serial tax evader. That's number one. Number two. Actually, I'm going to give you 3. Number 2 is, and these were 3 of the more right-wing judges, on the court, and they said, when Deri came before the Jerusalem District Court a year ago in February, He pleaded to lesser crimes. He could have been thrown in jail again on the criminal tax evasion charges that he was facing. He said, you know what, Judge? I'm going to leave public life. I'm out of here. You don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm just going to go quietly. And on the basis of that, the judge was very lenient with him and gave him a suspended sentence and allowed him to plead to lesser charges. Then Derry turns around a few months later and says, hey, guess what? I didn't mean like forever. All right. And the judges found that just so reprehensible, so not appropriate to the standard. I don't think an MK should be allowed to sit. But they said, you cannot lie to the court and then turn around and pretend it never happened. So those were the two reasons that the Supreme Court really arrived at their decision. I think it's also important to note that, this government keeps trying to, they play it one way or another way. So 1 minute they're saying, it's because the court's all a bunch of left-wingers, right? They're all left-wing. It's an activist court. All they want to do is undermine the legislature. Well, actually, that's not true. I mean, the Ministry of Justice and judicial appointments have been controlled by right-wingers for the last number of years. It was Gideon Saar and Axel Kudnik and Ayelet Shaked. And the bench is pretty evenly split now between liberals and right-wingers. There was a poll that came out today that 63% of Israelis believe that Derry is unfit for high office. They agree with the Supreme Court. As much as, Bibi and his coalition partners want to spin this as some kind of left-wing cabal, I mean, Yair Lapid is not a leftist. I am not a leftist. Bogi Ellin, a former Likudnik, former IDF chief of staff, Minister of Defense, is not a leftist. Gideon Saar is not a leftist. This is a cross-partisan clump of people, huge cohort of the population that is deeply, deeply concerned.
By the way, despite Bercovici's intense opposition to pretty much everything Itamar Ben-Gvir stands for, she does support his push to allow Jews to pray publicly at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is also the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's been a flashpoint since Israel captured it in 1967. Jews can visit the area in a very limited way, but Arab leaders and the UN consider anything more as a provocation, and Jews get accused of storming the site, and that often sparks riots and violence. I want to bring in Joe Roberts now. He's the new chair of JSpaceCanada, the progressive Jewish group that organized Saturday's Vigil for Democracy rally. So, Joe, your vigil for democracy came on the same day as the protests in Israel, but it also coincided with the launch on social media of Ambassador Ronen Hoffman's announcement that he wants to be recalled. What do you make of it?
I think there's always this question with the ambassadors serve at the pleasure of the government, are politically appointed. Dr. Hoffman was appointed by the previous prime minister. Very different political outlook. Obviously, this is now saying on the publicly and on the floor of the Knesset maybe that this government is trying to lead the country towards civil war. So maybe not in a total agreement with the government. I think that's got to be pretty understood. And so I think it is a very critical and very serious change. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how both the institutional Jewish community in Canada and our government responds to this, because I think it's got to be sending some shockwaves, through Ottawa as well.
You said you heard about it earlier until the tweet came out Saturday night. What did you hear? How did you hear about this?
Well, it pays to be hyper looped in on Twitter. You hear rumors floating around earlier in the day that this may be coming. And then, I didn't actually expect to see it directly come from him, but I was glad to. I think the message was responsible, but it was clear, right? This is a problem and this is a concern. And, that he didn't feel that he could align with it any longer. And this is not just, Dr. Hoffman. We've seen the Israeli ambassador to France also resign, much more vocal about the reasons for that. We've also seen, actual Israeli artists and performers we've heard from who've said, I'm turning down payment from organizations and things who will refuse to speak out. So I think this is a change that's happening where a lot of folks are just saying, like, I can't simply do my day-to-day job and ignore what's happening on the ground in the state of Israel.
Now, he was very, very careful in his tweets. He did not say, I don't like this, I don't like that. He just said, because of the change in government and the change in policy, it's again, I can't for professional and personal integrity continue to do this, but I'll stick around until they find someone. Normally, when an ambassadorship changes, they don't go public on this. It's kept quiet. And then they'll do an exit interview. He's refusing to do exit interviews. I asked.
Well, I think that sends a big message, right? He felt the need to distance himself from this government, right? In a very clear way, in a very public way. And I think that word integrity is very important here. He chose that. I'm sure every word in that tweet was chosen quite carefully, as you said. And the word integrity is meaningful, right? He's saying what they're doing goes against what gives someone integrity. What they're proposing goes against the idea of Israeli integrity in the global sphere. So that is a very important word. And I think we have to think about that in our context. What does integrity look like for us as Canadian Jews in the language that we use right in this moment around Israel? What does integrity look like in our actions around Israel? I think we have to find our voice. I often quote Plutarch. He said, that courage is the midway point between recklessness and cowardice. And I think we have to be really careful about that. But I think we need to find that courage right now and say, this is the time. I understand that there are communal implications of what I say. And I understand that there are implications for the Jewish community and in the global picture and the way that we're viewed in Canada even. But I think, a lot of people are waiting to hear what we say and follow our lead on this. And I think we have to be the first to speak out. Canada's relationship with Israel is changing. Our importance in that relationship is changing. It's becoming much different from a funding relationship. Canada is now the second largest funder of people-to-people work in the territories, right? Besides the United States. That's significant, right? And so I think that relationship is recognized. We're hearing from on the security side that Israel's very visible in the West Bank and in this work. And so we know that this relationship has a much more complex nature than it did even a decade ago.
You said Israel's very visible.
Excuse me.
Canada.
Canada is very visible. Yeah. The Canadian vehicles are visible traveling and doing this work. So it is very, I think this relationship is becoming much more complex between Canada and Israel. And it's becoming a much more important relationship. Also thinking about, we are one of the largest Jewish populations outside of Israel and the United States in the world.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shout-out goes to Gilbert Wainstock, who writes that, quote, after 1967, when Israel obtained almost all of Israel as a Jewish state, unfortunately, he says, Israeli politicians have, little by little, given away parts of Israel and received nothing in return. Plus, he says they allow the Arabs to take over large chunks of Israel. Now, he says, there are finally some politicians who might want to do something about it, unquote. We'll be back tomorrow with episode 6 of Some Honorable Mention, where Ron Sillag will join me as we pay tribute to some high-profile Jewish community leaders who have passed away recently, including Rabbi Baskin, Albert Reichman, Doreen Brownstone, and Maximilian Pollock. Thanks for listening. We'll talk then.